Hello and welcome to another episode of The Meta. I'm your host, Jay Larson, and joining me this week, I have one of the developers at Privateer Press, Erik Reiersen. Hello, Erik. How are you doing?
I'm great. How about you?
I am doing well. Um, so we've got a bunch of questions from the patrons of the podcast and myself for you, and I thought we would just dive right into those, if that's okay with you.
Hey, sounds good to me.
All right, so the first set of questions come from Dragon Pup, and his first one is, as a first-time guest on the Meta, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I've been working at Privateer Press for a little over 10 years. I started in June of 2012. Starting there, I started production, then moved to mold making, then I went overall production, then eventually all the warehouse. And now I'm also over development a bit. I've been playing War Machine since Mark 1. When Hordes first came out, ran a few demo games, bought into Signar and Legion, and absolutely loved it. I had played other games previously, and it's the one that just fully grabbed me, and I've been playing it ever since. I play Legion primarily. Overall, the strategy of just like closing the jaws of the dragon on the enemy and trying to take everything all at once, striking fast and far, really appealed to me. And yeah, that's probably my favorite play style too.
Nice. So his follow-up questions were, you touched on a little bit, but when did you start playing, and what was your first army?
So started playing when someone did a demo for me where they gave me a Magnus demo box to play against a Gorton demo box. And they gave me terrible instruction on what to do and basically led me to die. However, like the mechanics of it were really intriguing to me, regardless of like how they introduced it to me. And I started going further, and then I did like a Legion battle box versus a Protectorate. Same thing, they gotcha'd me with the feet, knocked everything down and killed me, but it intrigued me even more watching these mechanics grow on the tabletop. And by like seeing Kane teleport and jump around, seeing Striker able to knock things over, I'm like, okay, Signar, I really like the flight goggles and magic pistols look. And I've always been into dragons, so Legion was an easy like Hordes army to pair it with. Favorite casters, honestly, Striker 1, back in Mark 1, you could Cloud Wall, open it up, knock everything over, shoot it, and re-Cloud Wall, and you're like invincible. Thankfully, we got away from that a little bit. And Legion, Thagrosh was just a great centerpiece model where he's super dangerous. He gave your army like concealment. He took strength from the enemy. He supported it very well. He could bring your Carnivian back, and that I was all about that.
All right, so his next question is pineapple on pizza ?
So that is a good question. It's a fair. I'm not super binary on it. I think it's the size of the pineapple that matters. If it's like a big, cold, juicy chunk, it's jarring, the texture is terrible, it's too much sweet at once. But if it's chopped fine and spread over like a barbecue chicken pizza, I think that can be totally cool.
All right, and his next question is, what is your personal play style for war games?
I'd call myself cautiously aggressive in that my intent is to table you. However, I want to do it very carefully and decisively, where I have a lot of built-in redundancy and reliability in my army. I want to have good dice correction. I want to have good threat ranges. I want to have good control over how I execute the plan. I'm not one to just go, this is a 55% chance. Let's see how it pans out. I'm more of the no. Like it's got to be much higher. Like I got to have good numbers on my side. I got to do everything carefully, but I still want to really get in there. I'm not one to back towards the corner or anything.
All right, so his next questions relate to Mark 4. First one is, can you spell the Orgoth Warcaster names by memory, or do you check a reference doc?
I can actually, because being involved in every process in the building, I've had to write their names on every pre-production sheet, every casting sheet, mold sheet, packing sheet. So they're pretty in there.
Okay, so next one is, after 3 casters, 2 army boxes, and 80mm bases are out, Are there plans for further releases for Mark IV armies, like more character models or warcasters, or will the armies be more akin to Mark III limited factions, where it's planned on one and done?
I'd say both are true in that we still intend to release 120 millimeter models for the new armies, and we do intend to release a cadre that will work for both the Sea Raiders Orgoth army and whatever new Orgoth army becomes, likewise with all of the other new releases. And those cadres could have a caster in them potentially that works for both of the faction armies available. And some of that's to be explored yet. However, beyond that stuff, I wouldn't expect much expansion. One of the main design goals here is to keep strong equity and parity between the available armies, including legacy, as we brought them into prime with them. And expanding and bloating them beyond that would sort of undermine a lot of our design goals.
All right, so the next question is, who's your favorite caster for each of the new armies, either by rule of cool or by how they play?
So I really like them all because I've had my hands deep in them during the design process. But if I really had to bring it down, for Winter Corps, Commander Savarin, I like the idea of just this rigid, commanding officer, leading his troops, directing their fire, very in control, and his feat especially giving your army a lot of reliability, stripping away the opponent's defenses and giving you a lot of ability to apply your damage where you want it, how you want it. Even though Katarina does some things I really like, Savarin probably takes the cake. Kishtar had to heavily tone her down from her original incarnation, but I still love her. I still think she's a great range caster. Even if she struggles against a few things, that's sort of something you should design into your list as opposed to going full skew. Athena Debaro, probably. Her feat is amazing for my play style, making every model in your army capable and able to affect anything else in the opponent's army. And for Dusk, man, I like them all. They're so fun. Hazaroth reminds me a bit of more of like a Thagrosh, like a Thagrosh 2. So it might be Hazaroth actually, just for this big, scary beatstick caster.
All right, so next question for you is, what does the design steps look like when converting legacy models to a legacy prime army? How are the casters picked? What models get added in? Which half of beast jacks, etc.?
The way we approach legacy armies is we took an army and broke it down into what themes we thought were strong enough to support an army on its own. So looking at Khador, for instance, we see Winter Guard, Iron Fangs, Man of War, and Grey Lords. And Grey Lords themselves probably aren't enough to carry an entire army. And although Iron Fangs make a really strong and I think interesting army, and I also always like their aesthetic, there probably isn't enough built-in variety for how you would build that list to create enough diversity to carry an army with a lot of different builds varieties to tackle different challenges. The Man of War were probably always going to be an option, and the Winter Guard have just enough there to give different build styles and varieties to give you a variety of ways to approach play. Once we have established which themes we're bringing over as armies, we then look at the casters and say, okay, who thematically matches this army? And when looking at the casters, we don't have favorites per se. We like them all equally. So we don't have attachments to certain ones. It's not like, well, I always like this character, so let's force him. It's straight up like, well, Sorcha 3's in Man of War armor. It makes sense she's in the Man of War army. And then there won't be as obvious other ones necessarily. So then you have to go adjacent and find different play styles that still fit in there. And you'll see like in Trenchers and Man of War Armored Core that they ended up with Jack casters to give a very different battle group variety of play to help list pairings and variety of how to utilize that army going forward. As far as building the rules into them, if some of the available casters that are thematic are too close in playstyle to each other, we'll probably try and build in a little difference to them. We'll change feats, we'll swap out spells, we'll change abilities a little bit to ensure that they aren't too similar or overlapping too heavily as options within the same army. And options within the army as well, making that sometimes you'll find oh, I no longer have a piece that provides this ability, so we'll have to find someone that does, just to give you options on how to tackle different strategies. And for the most part, I think we succeeded. And we're still working on that too. So hopefully we end up in a really good place for everyone.
All right, so the next question from Dragon Pup. He says, will the upcoming War Beasts have a similar style of modularity as the Warjacks?
Yes, they will. You'll be able to also modify their animus. So give your armory a variety of options. Almost like a rack, you're basically building an extra spells to your army by deciding what your beast has available to them. But similarly to the heads on your warjacks, they'll all be costed separately, and the different builds you'll have with your different beasts will favor different animi and ways to play different play styles. So even though there will be fewer chassis than previously, there should be enough variety in how you can use them with the different casters.
All right, so next question is, when we submit feedback, what sort of things are you looking for? What helps players to be more effective communicators with the developers?
That's a fantastic question. So I guess the big ones are the problem itself is more important than the solution. So if you were to say, well, looking at these two light war beasts, they're both melee focused, they're both in the same army, but I would always choose this one over this one for these reasons and how they synergize with the casters. That's fantastic, because then we can evaluate, and whether you're right or wrong, it gives us perspective and how to approach it. But to say this model needs this without all the context, where you're offering a solution instead of a problem, it's kind of backwards, and that kind of feedback doesn't get us too many places. Another one is the feedback of what you're not even considering to take in an army is just as important as what you think is overpowered that you are taking or underpowered that you are taking. A lot of people build their army and they ignore a bunch of choices because they don't appeal to them. But it's good to sit back and say, why didn't they appeal to you? What was it about them? Like, are they not fulfilling a role for the army? Like, are they redundant with something else that you feel does it better? And that why you're not taking a piece, like ideally we want everything to be exciting and like a good option on the table. So if something's not, that's just as exciting for us on feedback. Like, that'd be great to know. And the why, of course.
All right, so next question is, in Mark III, a steamroller list allowed 2 lists from 2 themes to help shore up weak spots in matchups. How has that changed in Mark IV with armies having a much smaller range of models or casters? And how does that factor into designing a new army?
Well, it ensures that even though just for offering people a variety of what they like to play with, offering different ways to play, it also makes us really think about, okay, like this is very focused and these 2 casters are very focused in this direction. They need an option to give more diversity. And to ensure that a matchup, when you're taking 2 lists, you do have choices, and some people say, well, I don't feel there's a choice because they're thinking of the old casters they preferred for specific reasons. And this ties back into feedback where if the reason you don't like the caster choices we selected is because of their power level, then please help us have feedback on what you think needs to change to make them all equally enticing and offer different variety of options, as opposed to saying, I prefer this other caster because they do this. Say, we could get this caster to do something similar, and then it would fill the correct role to give you good variety when entering something like Steamroller. And that sort of design philosophy does play into the new stuff as well, making sure that we have a good variety of play, different approaches in how to affect your army, spell casting, infantry focused, beast focused, or just a caster that straddles the middle, offering you options on how to build it, different ways to bypass different defenses, and all of that's important, and making sure not one model does it all, but divided amongst them all. They all have different answers to different questions.
All right, so next question from Dragon Pup. I'm sorry, he had a follow-up with it. He says, do you feel that the spell racks and command cards also help cover some of the matchup issues?
That is one of the design intents of that. Sorry. Yeah. The command cards and the spell rack are very much there for just that, to reduce the danger of a skew destroying your preparations or even creating an unfun matchup, where it builds in variety to your list to answer different challenges, especially the rack. Where, you know what, I wasn't expecting to fight a range that list this strong. Then, well, you know what, I have a chance to mitigate how poorly I planned for that with my spell rack option. And it also, the command cards free up some of your list building, where I don't really need a lot of Pathfinder, but sometimes I'd like to have it. However, this solo that offers it is pretty expensive. I don't think I need him. I think I can just go with the command card this time. And freeing up that little building options instead of half your army being support solos to cover a bunch of different bases really opens up list building, and thankfully helps see a larger variety of lists in a lot of cases.
And I'm not sure if this one was a permitted question. I think so. But the last one from Dragon Puppy says, it may be too early to discuss, but are Colossals and Gargantuans shaping up with a left-right art?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, the question being, it's actually somewhat easier to design them. Instead of having to factor in their average capability versus their maximum capability, you're always drawing off their maximum, because without the arcs, you know what they're capable of doing turn to turn, and it's kind of straightforward. So costing them is actually able to be hopefully more appropriate than in the past.
Awesome. I'm sure people will appreciate that. So the next few questions come from David. He says, when testing a new or soon to be released model or army, how much upcoming material do you have to take into account? Or are you allowed to take into account is probably the correct way to say it.
So we never want to limit ourselves on what we're designing right now based on the possibility of what we could design down the road. But also, because we're human, we can't help but in the back of our minds be considering well, I don't want to use this now because I was sort of in my head saving this ability for when we release this model, or something down the road that isn't even concepted yet, where you're trying to plan in the future and build yourself that design space, but simultaneously you don't want to not offer a finished product up front for the hope that you'll get around to offering the right thing down the road. You need to offer something that, when releasing these initial armies, it has to be complete and functional without the hope of something that's going to be released a year from now. So yes and no. I guess is the best way to respond to it, where we do a little bit, but we're not beholden to it. We know we have to meet all initial demands up front.
All right, and then these final sets of questions were ones that I submitted. First one was, what's been the biggest challenge working on Mark IV?
Well, there's been a lot of challenges. I'd say the biggest one might be the fact that in an attempt to find a new baseline to grow from, we've had to remove a lot of abilities that people really liked from models. And everyone in a bubble will see, hey, my model lost this or went up a point or anything. But as a whole, everyone did, because things had grown off of a rule set for so long that we had to now try and redefine what the baseline is for everyone to share. And knowingly doing that to a lot of models that people were previously excited about is painful. We know it's for the best in the long run, and we know it's essential, but at the same time, it's man, I know players of this faction aren't going to love that change, but I think they'll learn why in time. It's just doing that initial pull of removing that rule or reducing a stat can be pretty rough.
So my next question was, what are you most excited about with the new edition?
Honestly, fresh faces and all the returning faces that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of renewed passion, a lot of new excitement, and really shaking things up, meeting new people, getting responses from lapsed players from first and second edition even that are just you know what, I haven't played in years. I had kids, etc. But I'm coming back, me and my group's coming back, and seeing all that passion is pretty exciting.
So next question was, what do you feel was the overarching design vision or mandate when working on this new edition? What were the key goals?
So the key goals for making it sort of a Mark IV instead of a 3.5 is there were plenty of little tweaks we could do to help refine the existing system, which it was in need of. But the main thing is although we had strong retention, we were having low acquisition because the game was just so difficult to get involved in. The app was paid, so if you wanted to know the rules or what the models even did, it could be difficult. You wouldn't know where to look, the websites. And when you did finally get into an army, there was a lot of purchases that may not have been efficient and may not have worked together, and it was hard to figure out what was a good purchase. You could buy two really cool models that you liked of the same faction and then find out they don't really work together. And we realized, okay, we need a sort of safe harbor. We need armies to be small enough that they're manageable, but big enough to offer a variety of options. And that's pretty difficult, by the way. And then say, okay, but now that they have this, if they go up against someone who has infinite options, like they will always be overwhelmed at all times. They'll never face the same army. So we had to sort of say, okay, everyone needs to be on even footing. Everyone needs to have these pared down forces and create a safe harbor of entry that still offers a satisfying enough experience that it won't grow stale by itself. And at the same time, even though our system's solid, we needed to streamline a lot of the bloated rules that were really just making it difficult to learn, but not really offering much at the top level of play. Where a lot of rules like how you approach measuring and placement, you'll always have locked down and right at the top level. But new players, that's where they fumble and get taken advantage of. And it's also a lot of bad feelings. Like people say you have to lose X amount of games before you can ever win. And that's very difficult to encourage people to keep trying that many times before they can have a satisfying experience with the game. And I still think you're going to have to, do some work in order to get to a place where you can start winning against veterans. However, I think we've reduced that and made it more accessible and easier to pick up. And all of those goals where easier acquisition, easier entry to the game, that's the app being free, all rules being immediately accessible. You can look at any model's rules, any army. Having everything available without a buy-in, I think that's also going to greatly help people be able to figure out how they want to get into this game, how they can get into this game, and have good knowledge of what's available and what they can expect to see on the opponent's side of the table as well.
So what was your biggest surprise on working on Mark IV?
The biggest surprise was kind of the explosively positive response we got when it actually got out there, where I expected a lot of people to be happy, but like the sales and all the emails we got of excitement were more than I expected because I hadn't done an edition changeover before. And in the past, edition changeovers saw a lot of grumbling, as people saw their models change. However, this one had a lot of renewed excitement of absent people or lapsed people that I didn't expect. And seeing the sales skyrocket, which crushed my poor production team, like that was pretty surprising. Didn't anticipate it, and we're still playing catch up because of it. But it's good, it's exciting.
All right, so next question is, what's been your favorite part of working at Privateer Press?
Probably the people. Like I've worked a lot of different jobs, and a lot of people didn't play any games, or if they did, it would be some easily accessible shooter on their Xbox or something, where everyone here is like a gamer through and through. Our coworkers play pen and paper outside of work, or video games together, or tabletop games together, obviously, and different groups, different people, all intermingling, good camaraderie because of it, and ability to relate to each other, ability to relate to the product, and management that cares and is just as hardworking as anyone else. Like, honestly, it's a really good atmosphere.
All right, so my next question was, what would you say to players that are disappointed that some of their legacy models will not be playable in Prime Arena?
I'd say I totally get that, especially as initial reaction. I'd say in practice, it won't look quite the way you're imagining. For casual players or players that simply want to use models in general, the Unlimited Arena will still be intended to be balanced as best we can and have availability of any models you wish. Currently, for the competitive players, when they're playing on a game night, normally they'll play their competitive list, which often does not have all their favorite models in it because it doesn't synergize well on a competitive level. So what they'll do is they'll play their competitive games and they'll say, hey, you want to play my jank list or a more casual game? Now what that will look like on game night is, hey, you want to play an unlimited game? and they'll still be able to play with those models. They'll still be able to have a fun and hopefully satisfying experience with them. They just won't be able to see them when they're in competition generally, or playing with people who aren't ready for the big expansive backlog of models, presumably new players.
All right, so my final question was, what would you say is the biggest challenge designing a game with such a rich history like War Machine, as opposed to designing a new game from the ground up?
Oh man, so a lot of things like expectations about a lot of things, but most importantly is there's so much lore and fluff to this game that every time you say, "Hey, what if we did this?" There's always no, this already happened here, and these people moved here. It's like, is this guy still alive? It's like, oh no, he died, and then it's like, oh man, what's going? So fortunately, we have a lore master, Matt Getz, who can help me with anything of like, oh, what if we did this? It's like, nope, can't do that for this reason. These people moved over here and that place is gone. That not knowing leads to a lot of questions being asked. And it's difficult also to have the confidence to change such a developed and existing world and offer new things to it, where you're like hesitant to say, what if we did this drastic thing? It sounds cool and fun, but it's also someone else's world. It's like telling your dungeon master like, oh, what if there's a city in your world and this is going on, and it's just that like you feel uncomfortable designing someone else's world. Fortunately, we're highly collaborative and we find a good place for any idea, and there's always room, but that initial push, there's a lot of layers of tape in between generally that you didn't expect.
Awesome. Before we go out, is there anything I didn't ask about that you were hoping to cover or go over?
I mean, nothing too specific.
All right.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So definitely want to thank you very much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us.
Oh, happy to.
Awesome. And uh, as always, uh, everyone can check out the Patreon. We try to do an interview with a Private Press staffer each month, and the patrons can submit questions. And then on our community member episodes, you'll be able to listen to bonus episodes as a patron of the podcast. Finally, check out discountgamesinc.com for your gaming needs, and you can go purchase your pre-orders on the Mark IV items that we are hoping will be releasing very soon. So check out the website, and finally, Erik, thank you again for coming on and sharing all this info with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet, and everyone have a great holiday season.